Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. We've got some more 3Racing X Reel this week. Let's see if we can do more than one page this time. I'm writing my notes/script at 10 PM on Thursday night this week, so you never know. Right, we've got the housing the spur gear lives in complete. It looks like this time we're going to fit the gears on the shaft and build up the second shaft with its gears. First, we're going to need some gears, the 20, 26, 34 and 40 tooth ones. There's the transfer nut, or dog clutch. It's plastic, but that's probably a good thing considering it's engaging with the metal gears. It should keep the metal on metal wear to a minimum. To go with the clutch, we need the shift fork. Now 3Racing call it a shift bar, which is a bit odd. Well, you'll need the long shaft with the splines up at one end, and a small diameter shaft for the gear shifting. 6 M3 E-clips and 2 M4 E-clips. A 9mm pin and an 8mm pin, and as mentioned before, there's 3 lengths of pins, so we need to be really careful to measure them to make sure we get the right ones. 4 M3x6 screws, and lastly there's 4 5x8x2.5 bearings and 3 5x10x4s. The kit comes with a little pot of grease, which we're going to be using. Not only is it good for lubricating the gears, but it's also good for pasting around the holes to stop the pins from falling out during assembly. A liberal blob around the pins is good too. None of the gears are a perfect fit, so there's going to be a little bit of movement. Grease in there will stop things from rusting and keep wear to a minimum. The first gear on the shaft is the 26 tooth, which slides over the 9mm pin. It's then held in place with one of the large E-clips. The next gear needs to be fitted in the right order. First the gear goes on and slides past its final position. The 8mm pin goes into the greased up hole, and the gear slides back along the shaft to lock with the pin. And a little bit of extra grease around the pin won't hurt while we're here. Now on the inside face we can clip in another of the E-clips. And on the end we need to fit one of the 5x10x4 bearings. We won't grease up the gears quite yet, as there's still some more assembly to do, and it's a lot easier when you're not trying to avoid touching the greasy gears. Next, 3Racing has us install the motor with its plate. In the video I've still got some extra shims setting the position of the spur gear, and as mentioned in the last videos, these shims caused a little bit of binding, so I ended up removing them. That means until the rest of the gearbox goes together, the spur gear moves around quite a bit. So for now we still can't set the position of the pinion on the motor. For now we'll keep the pinion flush with the end of the shaft, which should leave us with plenty of clearance. We'll still fit the plate and the motor to the housing with 4 M3x6s. We just need to remember to check the pinion position once it's all put together. We'll need to add some thread lock too when we're sure it's all in the right spot. We're on to the second boxed off section of the page now, and making up the shift shaft. Of course we're going to need a shaft, and you have to carefully match up the slots on the shaft with the diagram just to make sure you've got it the right way round. Then we can clip in one of the small E-clips, grease up the shaft and slide on the shift fork. Then to keep it on we just use another E-clip. Nice and simple. Shaft next, and first we'll be using the 34 tooth gear, which needs a 5x8x2.5 bearing installed on each side. As long as you press them in good and straight they'll slide in perfectly, but because it's such a good fit, if you get them angled they'll hang up on the way in. Up at the end with the splines we need to clip in one of the large E-clips, then slide on the 34 tooth gear, followed by another E-clip on the end. Next there's a dog clutch which slides up and down on the splines. We need to thoroughly grease them up. A nice coat all the way round should do the trick. On the clutch the interlocking bits need a nice coat too. Once the truck's up and running, any excess will be squished out and flung away. Slide the clutch over the splines and install another E-clip in the next slot. Follow that with the 40 tooth gear with the last two 5x8x2.5 bearings fitted, and fit the last E-clip to keep it in place. The last bearings go on each end of the shaft, and to stop them falling off we're just going to smear a little bit of grease on the shaft before sliding them on. And that is the end of page 5. Okay, page 6 now. Looks like we're going to finish up the gearbox and build the transfer box. First we're going to need the 2 housing parts of the 2-speed, and oddly there's only one half in the parts list. The other's only mentioned in the assembly diagram. We'll also need the 2 housing parts for the transfer box. the 3 gears, 2 20-tooth and a single 26. There's 2 shafts. The longer of the 2 is the output from the transfer box, and the shorter is for an idler gear. For bearings we need 2 5x8x2.5 and 4 5x10x4s. To hold it all together there's 7 M3x6s. Then we have 4 5x7x0.3 shims, 2 8mm pins and a 9.8mm pin, 3 of the large E-clips and 2 of the small ones. We'll start with the 2-speed housing on the left of the diagram. The gear assembly should drop straight in. Try it now before greasing it up just in case. If it fits nicely and the bearing slots into its hole and the gears don't catch on anything, we can slide it out and thoroughly apply grease to all the gears and in the slot in the dog clutch. Clip the shift fork into the slot with the long end of the rod parallel with the long shaft. Apply a smear of grease to the short end of the shift rod and slide the assembly into the housing. Because we've already tested it, we know it should go straight in. Add a bit more grease to the other end of the shift rod and fit the other half of the housing. It might need a gentle wiggle to get everything aligned. The 2 halves should go together with very little force. If it all feels okay, fit the 4 screws and snug them up. As usual, we need to be careful not to over tighten them. To limit the travel of the shift rod, we need to clip 2 of the small E-clips, 1 either side of the housing. These are to make sure you can't jam the dog clutch right up against the gears if the servo's not properly set up. So while you could get away without them, they are a good little safety measure. Next we've got the transfer box, and we're going to start with the side of the housing that faces the 2-speed. They're easy to tell apart. One side only has the 1 hole and the other has 2, which is the one that we want. First the housing slides over the output from the 2-speed. That's followed by a 5x10x4 bearing and a shim. And don't worry about trying to seat the bearing quite yet. Grease the hole in the shaft and pop in an 8mm pin. Follow that with one of the 20-tooth gears, then a large E-clip, a little bit of grease to protect the metal, and another shim and a bearing to cap it off. Now we can squeeze it all up to seat the bearing in the housing, and as before it shouldn't need much force as long as it goes in nice and straight. Next is the output shaft, which is a really simple assembly. All we do is smear a bit of grease in the middle hole in the shaft and pop in the 9.8mm pin. The 26 tooth gear goes on next, and then we clip in one of the large E-clips to keep it all together. There's also the idler shaft to assemble, and we smear a little bit of grease in the hole and slide in the 8mm pin. Install the last of the gears, a 20 tooth, and clip a large E-clip in the slot. Now all we do is add a little bit of grease to the E-clip and slide on a shim and a 5x8x2.5 bearing. Flip it over, apply some more grease to the back of the gear and slide on the last shim and the last 5x8x2.5 bearing. Next we can install the idler and the output shaft in the transfer box housing. But first we're going to blob a little bit of grease on the gear on the 2-speed shaft and install one of the 5x10x4 bearings in the back. Then we can fit the idler and the output, making sure we install them nice and straight. To spread the grease around, we can spin the 2-speed shaft, being fairly gentle. After a few spins, we can see the grease has made it all around all the gears. And that's all we need in there. There's no point in really packing it with white ceramic grease. Now if you go marine grease, packing the gears is quite common to keep the water out. It does add a lot of drag though, and I'm not sure how the 2-speed would like it. But hey, it's a truck, not a submarine. All that's left to do is install the last 2 bearings and offer up the second half of the housing to the first. As usual, it might need a bit of a wiggle to get everything lined up, and it shouldn't need much force to get it to go together. And to hold it together, we just install the last 3 M3x6 screws. Nip them up, and that's page 6 complete. Well, that's going to be it for this week. Well, we didn't quite get the gearbox finished, but we're very nearly there. On the next page the 2 halves come together and then the drive shafts get fitted. So as always, thanks for watching, like if you liked, subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment if you've got something to say. Bye guys!